All right, thanks, Wendy. Good September afternoon to everyone. I'm Tony Bergantino, Director of the Water Resources Data System in the State Climate Office. Welcome to the September webinar, which means we're back into months with an R in them. So I don't know what that means as far as oysters, but we'll go with it. The monthly webinar this month is going to be in concert, as usual, with the University of Wyoming Extension, which is also part of the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, U.S. Geological Survey, the Wyoming State Engineers Office, Bureau of Land Management. We have the National Weather Service office in Riverton, and as a special feature, we have the Great Basin Coordination Center on as well. And today we'll be going over, as usual, the current drought and climate conditions, surface water status, water rights administration, some weather forecasts, a wildland fire update, and then, as I said, finally a special presentation from the Great Basin Coordination Center on some fire resources and some additional outlooks. So, current conditions, looking at the drought map, like last month, the map is looking worse than the previous one. Had a number of degradations outlined there in red up in the northern, roughly 3/4 of the state. Saw some of those changes. Two of those areas, the ones that have that dark red, they had a 2-category decline over the last 5 weeks since we last met. We did see some improvements, and those are the green areas, but unfortunately they are confined to about the southern quarter of the state. Looking at it last year, at this time, the entire state was completely out of drought, normal, no abnormally dry conditions, just all gray. The area they're circled in green on the left up there in Teton County. That was the only place last month when I was showing it from a year ago that had any drought type conditions in it, and that's even gone this month. Currently on the right, though, things are obviously a lot worse. Other than the area in Sweetwater and western Carbon County, we've got color all over the map. So here's the drought in Wyoming since 2000. You can see the levels are increasing, although we did have a little dip in the overall area of the state that was affected from prior weeks. It is still up just slightly at 0.07% from the last webinar. So presently, 96.45% of the state is covered by one of those D categories. The area covered by the actual drought, the D1 through D4 or moderate through exceptional drought categories, now stands at just under 62%, 61.97 to be exact. And that's up over 7 1/3% from the last webinar. And since that last webinar, the D3 or extreme drought did show up there, and you can see that starting to grow there on the lower right part of the chart. The area of the state covered by it is now just over 8%, and the amount of the state not in any of those D categories, no D0 through D4, is now just over 6.5%, which is actually up almost 3% from the last webinar, thanks to the removal of some D0 down in Sweetwater County. But unfortunately, the severe and moderate drought has increased in addition to that extreme drought that was introduced last month. Looking at our 14-day, this is precipitation over the last 2 weeks. It's favored the northwest, although a few scattered areas, some other areas along with Albany County, Eastern Carbon County, some over in the Platte Goshen counties have seen just slightly above median precipitation. There's a small part of Weston County and some part of southern Campbell County also benefited, but quite small areas there as well. Fremont County and Southwest, along with southern Carbon County, are well below median. And as always, those areas shown in gray received about median precipitation for the last 2 weeks. Jumping to the 3-month view, you can see the whole northeast quarter of the state has a fair amount of red and even deep red on it, signifying precipitation totals that are down under the 10th percentile, and actually quite a bit of that area is under the 5th percentile. Some parts of the northwest are in similar shape, and then you got Albany and Laramie County on the flip side, having had mostly above median precipitation in the last 90 days, as has a small patch there in central Wyoming. And those are about the only real above median areas in the state, although there is a decent amount of area, especially in the south and southwest, that's depicted in gray, median right about at the median. So here's our depictions for the calendar year and the water year-to-date precipitation, showing it as a percent of average. Very similar maps again, and this will continue to be the case until October 1st when the new water year starts, and then the map over here on the left will reset and start showing accumulations from that period forward. You can see better conditions in central and north central Wyoming when considering the precip since October 1st of 2023 on the left. But the south looks a bit wetter as far as precipitation when you look at the map from January 1st onward. So here, standardized precipitation index, that SPI, shows short-term wetness. That's at 30 and 60 days across the top, up there in the northwest, along with some scattered other regions. The dryness in the northwest stands out, while at 30 days on the upper left here, we have an emerging area of concern there in the southwest. Down at 1 year on the bottom right, we see a little bit of wetness up there in the Bighorn Basin, but slightly moderate dryness prevailing in the east and some parts of the west, even looking back 365 days. Starting to see some nighttime temperatures dip below freezing in the high elevations. When you look at it over a 2-week period, all those areas of purple on the upper left saw an average low temperature that was below 32 Fahrenheit over the last 2 weeks. Sublette County saw lows dipping into the low to mid 30s as well. The east, Bighorn Basin, still seeing lows in the upper 40s and 50s. As a side note, yesterday my co-op station down here in Laramie experienced its first temperature below 32 for the season. So it's coming. Departures from normal down here on the lower left, still warmer on the warm side. A few scattered pockets below normal and a few large areas about medium, but otherwise temperatures above to well above normal, with some higher elevation areas seeing departures 10 degrees or so above normal, or even more in places. Jumping up to the maximums, high temperatures the last 2 weeks on the upper right, still quite warm, with the areas in red. We're seeing average highs over the last 2 weeks being in the mid 80s to lower 90s. Otherwise, low 70s and below in the high elevations, with 80s east of the divide and 70s to very low 70s west of the divide, generally speaking. When you look at the departures from normal for the maxes down here on the lower left, it kind of shows a gradient going from northeast to southwest, with departures generally increasing the farther southwest you go. Temperatures more than 10 degrees above normal up here in the northeast, but down to about 4 degrees or so above normal east of the divide. West of the divide saw about normal, that area in gray, up to about 4 degrees above normal in some places. Soil moisture of the entire state is now below median in terms of that. The worst areas are over here in the east, especially the northeast, where a large area is under that 2nd percentile. And that area is surrounded by a much larger area that's below the 10th percentile. And the northwest conditions have actually improved some, but other than that little improvement up there, the rest of the state has either remained the same or has seen the conditions decline. The vegetative drought index on the left here is where we were 2 weeks ago, while the one here on the right is the latest one from what would that be, this Sunday. Not much difference between those two, other than conditions being a bit worse in the south. But looking back at a year, just like the one we showed last month, and really all summer when you think about it, not much to say comparing the current state of the vegetation on the right here where we were a year ago on the left. And I'm not seeing any areas readily standing out that are better now than where they were a year ago. And in fact, most areas are quite a bit worse. This is more of a placeholder. I'm not going to dwell much on it, other than to say that we're starting to see our first widespread accumulations of snow up in the high elevations of the northwest. So the cycle starts anew and snow water equivalent starts to build while the hydrograph continues to decline, which I think is a perfect lead in for Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS to give a little bit of a talk on what those surface water conditions are doing. Aaron?
Hi, Tony. Thank you. So yeah, here we are, kind of the mid to late September, and looking at this graphic from the National Water Information Dashboard, you see a bit of greens out there. That green is considered normal. That's the 25th to 75th percentile. This was snapped yesterday, so with a bit of the rain, we have some lighter blues, which is above normal. That's the 76th to the 90th percentile. And then up in the park, in the western part, there's a couple blacks, which are all-time highs for the day, which it's a period of low flow. So an all-time high is it's certainly not a flood event or a record buster there, but it is an all-time high for the day. And then around the winds, you see a couple lower flows in the below the 25th percentile. Those are those oranges or light oranges, and then some lower flows over there in the green. So moving on to the next slide here. So this is normally I'll present a 1-year duration hydrograph, but this is just wanted to highlight that 2 years, since we can take a bit of a look back as we're ending the water year here at the end of the month. And right now highlighted that it's showing this is an amalgamation of flows, and it's at a 7-day average runoff in millimeters. So it's a runoff per area, but showing that in Wyoming in general, that flows are pretty low. They're somewhere below the 25th percentile. It seems a little bit low, but that's kind of showing where it is, and kind of taking a look back at the water year. Since we've had runoff, things have been quite low, but looking backwards, we're kind of coming off a pretty reasonable water year here in Wyoming. So, but this is a time of continued recession, and it's a time of precipitation too. So hopefully we'll start to see some bumps and flows as rain and snow moves through here in the next month or two. So moving on to just take a look at this this 28-day average. That just gives us a good idea of what's been happening in the last month. And you see a fair amount of green out there. And when you look at those sites, since that range is the 25th to 75th, most of those sites are above the median, so that's pretty good. Still seeing pretty dry conditions in the Northwest. When I presented this last month, it was pretty similar, that we have a lot of below the 25th percentile flows with water coming out of the park and out of the winds up there. So pretty dry in the Northwest still, and hopefully that changes soon. Moving on to the next. So just kind of bumping around here at the North Fork of the Shoshone. Yesterday it was showing that above average, and you kind of see that bump and flow from that rainstorm that was kind of swirling around Montana and in Wyoming yesterday. So pretty good bumps and flows there. Hopefully things kind of continue to be a little bit higher from where we were at near the 25th percentile and get closer to the median. Moving over to the middle fork of the Powder here. Right now that things are just kind of continuing to recede. We're still in that normal range, but we're a lot closer to the 25th percentile than the median. So things are a little bit lower there. Hopefully they'll start to benefit from some precipitation here soon. And then going down to the North Platte above Seminole Reservoir, this is a little bit different looking hydrograph, as we see the flows really start to ramp up here in October and November into December. But right now flows have been in that normal condition, and they're getting pretty into the 25th percentile. So things are a little bit low there, and we'll see if things turn around here soon. And then moving over to the Green River at Warren Bridge. Since runoff hit, things have been in that 25th percentile pretty much the whole time, and that's where it is today. It's looking somewhere pretty close to that 10th percentile at the lower end of that range of the 10 to 24th. So things are pretty low in that part of the Green River. And then just taking a look at storage, hasn't been a whole lot of big inflows, so it's been generally decreases across the board in most reservoirs. Reservoirs in the Northwest are somewhere between 60 to 90% full. And then the Northeast, Southeast reservoirs are a little bit lower in that 50 to 70% full. So it seems to be water's most moving out of most reservoirs to still go to irrigation or other uses. And it's not a lot of storage built over the last month. That's all I have. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
Aaron. Now we go over to Michelle Hubbard with the State Engineer's Office to talk about water rights administration around the state.
Hello. This will probably be my last presentation for water year 2024, since the water year ends in about 11 days. And so all of these calls that I'm talking about will then end as well. So really briefly, this map just shows the 4 water divisions in the state. Division 1's mostly North Platte. Division 2 is the Powder and Cheyenne and Belle Fourche. Division 3 is Bighorn, and then Division 4 is mostly the Green with the Snake and Bear River as well. And so I'm just going to walk through each division and highlight the calls. Any new call is identified in bold and italicized, and so majority of these calls have been on all summer at this point. And so really in Division 1, we're regulating back to 1880s and 90s through most divisions at districts at this point. And I'm going to save everybody me reading through all of the rivers. I'll just highlight the new ones. And so Division 1, again, a lot in Horseshoe Creek, Laramie River is back to decree rights. And then the new addition since August is the Little Laramie, and that's being regulated to 1875. Again, most of this division is regulated back to the 1880s, 1890s. So moving on to Division 2, there are a couple, there's regulation on the Belle Fourche for compact compliance, and then Little Goose Creek back to 1883. And I think there's one new stream under regulation. Nope. District 2 or Division 2 has kind of maintained, again, at this point in the year, there's not a whole lot of water in the system. And so people kind of know if they're making it to the end of the irrigation system. And a lot of times at this point, there's not new calls because there's no new water. And you can't really irrigate much since winter is on its way. All right, Division 3. Again, in this division, we're regulating back to the 1880s and early 1900s. I believe, and then their Owl Creek changed from a regulatory date to just in-stream stock use. And I believe the next slide, there is no new additional districts under regulation. Again, sticking with the early 1900s. Division 4, back to 1880s and early 1890s. The Bear River has been on for a majority of the summer, and that is compact compliance. And then the Smiths Fork, also the new regulation was back to 1890 since August. And there might be another creek. Yep. Okay, so Bridger Valley, they are just releasing CFS for the remainder of the water year. And then Coral Creek in District 9 is regulated back to 1890, on top of all of the previous districts. And that is all I have for you. So hopefully next year, Water 2025, we'll have a good snowpack and there won't be multiple pages for each division on regulation. So that is all I have for you.
Thanks, Michelle, and let's hope that comes to pass. Now, looking forwards with the outlooks, we have Lance Vandenbogart with the National Weather Service up in Riverton. Go ahead, Lance.
All right. Thank you, Tony. So first, we'll just look at the typical Wyoming hazard calendar here. And you can see we're actually even into where we can start dealing with some winter weather up on the top there. Fire weather is wrapping up, although we know it's been pretty warm and dry. So that season still continues there. We're in the kind of the error bar or the less likely but still possible time frame. And we haven't had much river flash flooding this year. Still a threat of, if we get a big weather system come through, we might have some severe weather. And then high wind, as we saw yesterday. Yesterday was a pretty windy day across much of the state. We're starting to move into peak season for those high winds once the jet stream starts moving back over the area. So that's kind of where we sit as far as typical weather hazards. And now we'll look at the next 7 days here, and you can see it's going to be a pretty dry week across much of the state. A lot of basically nothing. Those white colors showing up. Even the lightest green there is that's less than 1/10 of an inch, which 1/10 of an inch we usually call a wetting rain. So even the mountains aren't going to get a wetting rain most likely, except down in the southeast part of the state. So that sticks out as a sore thumb. I'd say it's fairly low confidence, especially Sunday, end of the weekend time frame. There is a weather system moving through to the south. It's going to hit Colorado pretty well, and maybe Laramie County, Cheyenne, and the southeast corner of the state get some of that precipitation. But if that shifts a little bit, that could be notably less as well. So just know that it's going to be a fairly dry week unless you live in the southeast corner, which a lot of people do. So that is something. All right, so let's look at the week after next, and 8 to 14 days. So pretty high confidence here for above normal temperatures. I do put a little bullet there. We're not going to go to that right now for the sake of simplicity and staying in the slide deck. But there's an interactive version of this map where sometimes we get the question of, okay, it's strong signal for above normal. Well, what's normal for me? Well, that really depends if you're on the side of a mountain or down in the southeast corner of the state, let's say. So that has an interactive map where you can click and it'll tell you the normal. So I just pulled that up myself here, and I can tell you for Riverton, Wyoming, for instance, this time frame, September 26th to October 2nd, the average high is 62 degrees and the average low is 36. So notably, or a high confidence for being above that for this time frame is what this map is showing. All right, if we move over to the right, then you can see there is a lean towards below normal. That's not quite as high confidence as that above normal temperatures, but still statewide, a lean towards below average precip in the last week of September into early October. If we step forward, we can go ahead and look at the whole month of October and what is it looking like. Now, this is where you have to start looking at not just weather models, but the overall climate system and what is the Pacific Ocean doing? How are the temperatures looking across the equatorial Pacific? And you can see not nearly as high confidence, but there is a slight lean towards above normal temperatures, at least for the southern half of the state. And then on the right-hand side there, it would also be, it's a slight lean towards below normal precipitation for the southern half, or maybe 2/3 of the state there. And then going even a little bit further yet and looking at kind of, mid-fall through the beginning parts of winter, fairly similar to what we just talked about, except for maybe a slightly stronger signal for above normal temperatures. But precipitation-wise, that dry looks more centered over Texas in the southern part of the United States and doesn't really get into the southern part of Wyoming. So what that's going to mean is that climatology is your best forecast. And oftentimes when we talk about climatology, at least in the local weather forecast office, we're talking about 30-year averages. So looking up what your normal high and your normal low is, that can oftentimes be the most helpful when there's not really a strong signal in the oceans or in the overall global atmosphere. All right, I think that wraps up my section.
That looks like it. Thanks, Lance.
Yep.
All right, and with a look at the wildland fire situation from the Bureau of Land Management, we have Casey Cheesebro.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll start with just a couple basics as we clear up a few terms that we'll use here as we go through, just talking about fuel moisture content in the fuels. So you heard about, the weather, what the weather's been doing, what it's expected to do. Topography is just kind of what it is out on the landscape. So really the other piece of wildland fire potential is the fuel moisture out there. So when we look at that, we're looking at live fuels and dead fuels. Obviously, those are the two types of fuels out on the landscape that carry wildland fire. And so your live fuels are going to change based on, just that plant phenology, the time of year, soil moisture at that specific site, slope that you find those fuels on. So that's we don't see a lot of variability in that necessarily in the short term, but our dead fuels are where we typically see a lot of up and down throughout the year. So we're looking at the size of the fuels basically based on the amount of time that it takes for them to dry out. So our 1 hour fuels being those 1/4 inch or less fuels, so grasses, forbs, things like that. 10-hour fuels being small twigs and branches in that 1/4 inch to 1 inch range. 100 hours, 1 inch to 3 inch, so larger branches, small trees. And then the 1,000-hour fuels, the down logs, large branches, those things that are greater than 3 inches. And so when we look at, trying to discuss a month-long period, we really focus on that 1,000-hour fuel, just because that's what we see more of a trend in. Everything else bounces a little bit too much within a month for it to be real valuable for that time frame. So the other piece of that is just the fuel loading, which we measure in tons per acre. And again, that just varies across the landscape depending on the site. So we'll jump in and look at some energy release components from around the areas, around the states. These energy release components are just a composite of those fuel moistures that we talked about. So this is all fuel moisture driven. And so looking around the state up at the Devil's Tower, figured we'd start with that one since that was where all the bright red drought monitor information was. And it makes sense with what we've really seen throughout the year. Been a couple periods where we've set some maximum values up there for the energy release component. And here recently, we're just at that red line again. And of course, we saw some larger fire growth up in the northeastern part of the state. The cooler weather that we just had are showing a little bit of a drop here recently, but still well above average for this time of year. Probably one of the bigger gaps that we've had being above average this year, which is that gray line that you see kind of going up and down at the bottom there, being the average value. So how that corresponds, we talked about the 1,000-hour fuel moisture. So if our energy release components are high, this is what we would expect to see, that our fuel moisture values are down. So they're dry. They don't have a lot of moisture in them out there. Makes sense with the drought map that we saw those are pretty much bottomed out, setting minimum values here in the recent past. Bounce over to the next location. So over in the Shoshone area, which I know some folks had some interest maybe in the Fish Creek fire, so I figured this one would be of interest. And you can see there about the time when that fire started, we were starting to get above average for the energy release component in that area. Saw a big drying trend, took us up to setting some of those maximum values. And then of course we've had some cold fronts come through, some precipitation. So we've seen some dips and some climbs like we'd normally expect to see with those weather patterns. And currently sitting below average over in that area, but just a couple days ago we were still above average. So overall kind of average for that area for September, with some fluctuation in there. Great Divide Basin going down southwestern Wyoming. Again, kind of similar to the Shoshone, where we were above average here not too long ago, but then with the recent weather, we've dropped now well below average. But you can see how fast those values can change over time. So with what they were showing there, what Lance was showing with the 8 to 14 day outlook, if we do stay warmer and drier, I would expect that we'll come back above average here for this September into October time frame. So just the kind of the fire season that won't go away for sure, statewide really, but especially in that northeastern part of the state. But we are seeing those dry conditions really statewide. The potential is there. We just haven't had the ignitions that we've had up in the upper, the northeastern part of the state. Go to the next one, Tony. So just focusing in on more of our timbered areas, forested areas, looking down the Medicine Bow route. And so pretty good climb here, that more recent warm and dry trend that took us up well above average. And then here, this cooler weather, some of the folks were talking about the last few days, and some of the precip starting to show a little bit of a trend back down, coming back towards average, but still well above average right now for mid-September down in the timber in the southeastern part of Wyoming. And the Bighorns, pretty up and down for weather in the Bighorns lately. We've had some good warm, dry weather, but the cooler, wetter weather that we have had has been significant in the Bighorns. So we've seen those up and down patterns. Currently, we are sitting below average, but very feasible if we do stay warm and dry that we'll be back above average. And as we get into early October, where those maximum values tend to be quite a bit lower, we could be to that point where we start to set some new maximum values if we do see another sustained warm and dry trend here move in. So, but otherwise pretty seasonal right now. We are seeing the shorter burn periods. That's helpful. The day length obviously is getting shorter, so that gives us a little more time when we do get humidity recoveries overnight. Gives us a little more time for that humidity to impact fires that are on the landscape or impact the fuels. A little less drying throughout the day, but just as folks know, just really a warm, dry, late summer and early fall here so far. So fire potential staying pretty persistent. September outlook. So this comes out on, let's try to preface this, comes out on the 1st of the month. So we're, 19 days out of date on this already, but I would say it's been pretty accurate for September. We had pretty good fire potential up in the northern half of Wyoming, really, and we saw that play out with fire behavior on Fish Creek Fire, the Short Draw Fire, some other smaller fires we've had up there in northeastern Wyoming. Haven't seen the same level of activity in southern Wyoming, although there was the Pearl Fire just south of the state line, the Boulder Ridge area. Folks are familiar with that. Poked up the other day, pretty good growth on that fire, but left out with some moisture coming in right behind. And for now, that fire's calmed down quite a bit. So I'm sure folks in Laramie probably did see some activity or saw some of that smoke column poke up a couple days ago. As we go into October, kind of what we would expect to see around the west, cooler weather, hopefully some snow in the higher terrain, seeing the red areas kind of fall out of the west. Southern California always kind of persists into the fall with the Santa Ana winds and drier fuels out there. And then the southeastern part of the U.S. looking like it could be pretty persistent into the fall here. So good news for Wyoming, kind of in the clear as we get into October. Same thing there in November. Sounds like we got another presenter that'll talk a little bit more about some other websites and products, but I know like Chase had added this in for the last presentation. So I pulled in just where we're sitting for today's fire danger with some of the sunny, dry weather that's out there. We are seeing some very high fire danger right now, and really across the Casper dispatch zone anyway, which covers a good chunk of Wyoming. So you can see the map down below what those fire danger rating areas are as far as what those fire dangers correspond to. But yeah, I would say, really the conditions are there statewide for fire growth, just a matter of whether we get the starts or not. So we've got more, usually hunting seasons opening up as a time frame in the summer, in the fall, where we see increased number of starts, more people out in the woods, cooler weather, people using fires to stay warm or cook over, not putting those out. So focus on prevention efforts there. And then kind of interesting, quite a bit of lightning really here the last couple of weeks, which is not super normal for late August into September, but we seem to be getting certain weather patterns that to me resemble early summer or midsummer in places. So we'll see if we keep picking up lightning. We could see more fire starts as well. That's all I've got, Tony.
All right. Thanks, Casey. And with this month's special feature, and if I completely butcher your last name, just yell at me. We have Basil Numerzicki from the Great Basin Coordination Center to give more of an update on fire conditions.
Okay, did pretty good. Can you hear me okay?
You're a bit light.
Let me pump up the volume on my end here. Stand by. How's this now? Still light?
Yeah, Basil, you're still a little bit light, but I think if you just lean in towards your computer, we'll be able to hear you a bit better.
Okay, I'll try here. This is me. I'm at a docking station actually, so I'm gonna slide my laptop a little closer to me here, and this is about the best that I think I can get it. I have my volume up at 100%. So just looking at our fire potential, I'll just go to the next slide. This is the impact map. And we put this out just as a general weather refresher, what's going on the next couple of days. And we are going to be drying out finally across much of the Great Basin. You can see our forecast area covers just about all of Utah, Nevada, the southern half of Idaho, and just a tiny sliver of Wyoming. Basically, the Teton National Park minus Yellowstone and the Bridger Teton National Forest. And humidity is going to start dropping off next couple of days after quite a bit of rain. Go to the next slide. And this is a map that's updated automatically every 24 hours. New and existing fires. The open purple circles are large fires that actually have large type 1 or type 2 teams given out to them. And you can see across western Wyoming, the Fish Lake fire there. Yeah, the large circle there. So if we go to the next slide, that one's a bit more in plain English. And you can see the Fish Creek fire there. And the text wording that's there came from the daily incident management report that every fire delivers out. And you can see that timber and brush, the main thing, minimal fire behavior with just backing and creeping. That's just some smoldering at the surface. Precipitation occurred over the fire yesterday. Precipitation has occurred on and off on that fire, something like 7 out of the last 9 or 10 days. We'll look at that in a second. If we go to the next slide, you can see this is just the past 7 days. And if you kind of go to where the Fish Creek fire is, you can see like the darker, yeah, where the cursor is. Whoever's doing the cursor is doing a good job, I must say. There's right towards that dark green area to yellow. That's about, if you look at the key on the left, it's about anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches of rain, depending on what perimeter of the fire it's going on. And it's one thing in the summertime, if you just get that in a 30-minute thunderstorm, that can dry out really quick. But when you get that kind of precipitation with several hours of duration per day, a couple of hundredths here, a 1/10 of an inch there, a 1/4 of an inch the next day, and high humidity throughout, that really seeps into the larger, deeper fuels. So that's one thing we're looking at. And interestingly, if we look on the panel on the right where it says percent of normal, you can see the dividing line right there between the 400 to 800% of normal, and then to the yellow where we're like maybe 70 to 80% of that weekly normal. So very close call, but the Fish Creek is on the wet side of it, so that's good news there. Go to the next slide. It's called our ERC point map. So each station has ERC or energy release component values. The higher the percentile values, the higher the number in the ERC, the drier and more combustible the combination of fuels are. So you can see kind of in western Wyoming there, not only are they below the 50th percentile, but there's a downward arrow saying they're continuing to drop down lower because we're still not seeing daytime humidity levels dropping down below 20 to 25% much. Go to the next slide. This is the 1,000-hour fuels. And I had another one, I guess I must have hit it, but I think when the previous presenters showed the ERC chart map, and it's basically giving us a normal ERC of close to mid-October, which is basically out of the normal fire season range. Now, the 1,000-hour fuels are heavy fuels that take about 1,000 hours to dry. You can see western Wyoming, the area in the green, and light green is 16 to 20%. Typically, we get the 1,000-hour fuels playing a role in fire once they get towards 10%. So it's going to take a long time, 1,000 hours, which there's 168 hours in a week. You're talking about needing about 5 weeks of dry weather to really get things back to possible new starts going into new fires. So we go to the next page. Oh, here it is. So you can see western Wyoming is one of our many zones. The top chart, you can see what that blue dot is down there. That is the current ERC value, energy release component, which dropped down. And you can see it is well below normal, even the gray lines, which are there, that's your normal stuff. And normally as you go into like late October and November, you're in more benign values. And while it's true we were very high a while ago, when you get a week worth of 1 to 2 inches of rain over long duration, that changes the landscape. So it's not like, oh, well, we're dry for a couple of days and we're going to bounce back. No, the projected green line you see extending upward is where our computer models think we're going to be with 7 days of predicted drying. And even that keeps us below the gray line normal. And to get back to where the blue line peaks, so like from a week or two ago, that would take an extraordinary amount of warm, dry, and windy weather, and probably not very likely at this point. So I think with our large fire there with the Fish Creek, I mean, I'm sure in the next couple of days, and actually let's go forward a little bit. Let's talk about the weather. Next slide. So for today, you see the closed low over Santa Barbara. There's green cloud. The green air colors are mid-level moisture where there's clouds and precipitation. We go more towards western Wyoming. We can see that air is a little bit drier. On the right-hand side are it's part of our forecasted significant fire potential boxes. And normally when we are in the brown or the yellow, that's when there's an increased chance of large fire activity. Right now, we and all of the Idaho fires are currently in the green. Let's go to the next slide. On the left are predicted winds, and they're kind of light. And we brief this to our coordination center and to our firefighters every day. On the right is the minimum relative humidity. How dry will it get today? You see the 42% kind of right over the Fish Creek fire. We've noticed with these large fires in Idaho and western Wyoming that you have to get down below the upper 20s, like 27, 26% to start seeing the fire starting to pick up in activity. So we don't expect much today. Let's go to the next slide. Again, the upper low on the left moves more towards Vegas. If you go towards western Wyoming on that panel, you see a bit more of that tannish shade. That's drier air mass humidity from about maybe 10 to 20,000 feet that makes us down to the surface. Or we're going to see clear blue skies finally across a large portion of the area. Not changing our fire potential outlook on the right that much. But if we go to the next slide, we'll see the humidity on the right-hand side dropping down to 33%. So still not getting down to the upper 20s, but getting close. And if you look on the left, there will be some winds up there. You see those dark green and orange shades? Those are wind gusts somewhere in the 24 to 28 mile an hour range. It'll be breezy. It'll start the drying process. I don't even think we'll see much fire activity tomorrow, but it's going to start drying things out. Now, if we go to the next slide, a couple of things. There's low pressure over the Four Corners, rotating clouds and moisture into eastern Utah and southern Wyoming, especially southeastern Wyoming. But if you go to northwestern Wyoming, they're on the dry side of that counterclockwise rotation. They'll stick with the dry air. Now, if we go to the next slide, what we'll see is the relative humidity gets down to about 29%. And that's kind of like our threshold for maybe starting to see the fire activity going on. So given that, and on the left-hand side, there could still be some breezes occurring. There's stronger winds down south with the precip, but maybe gusts of 15, 20 miles an hour. I would say Saturday and leading into Sunday, we could start seeing some interior burning. At that point, the crews will probably know what is left on that fire that they'll be working with. And it's possible they might say, hey, and that's one thing, when you have 25,000 acres of fire perimeter, that's a lot of stuff. You see a lot of interior burning still going on when you dry out for a couple of days. If they don't see that by this weekend, they might hand that fire over to the local forest and say, hey, we're done with this. You guys are good. So this weekend's going to be a good test. If we go to the next slide, 3-day precipitation totals, again, hitting southern and southeastern Wyoming pretty good with maybe a 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch of precip, but not much in western Wyoming. We'll go to the next slide, and we'll just quickly go through the next couple of days. This will be Sunday. Still that dry air mass through much of the area. Go to the next slide, which is Monday. There'll be a little weak front that comes in. You see that little green area of clouds. The models are suggesting just high mid-level clouds, very little in the way of precipitation. But if we go to the next slide, all of a sudden the map changes. You get this big high pressure ridge building up across Utah and into Idaho, Wyoming. That should bring temperatures maybe 8 or 10 degrees above late September normals. Not much wind, but definitely warmer and drier. So I'll continue the drying trend. And if we go to the next slide, which is Wednesday, that high pressure ridge slides eastwards into eastern Wyoming and into the Dakotas. And what you see to the west is a strong cold front, and you see those upper level wind barbs and those light blues over Idaho. Those are some strong upper level winds of like 40, 50 miles an hour. Those are synonymous quite often with ridgetop winds. So that's going to be the next test, middle of next week, after some warm, dry conditions, a really pretty good wind event for Idaho and Wyoming. So for the Fish Creek and for the dozen or so large fires in Idaho, that's when we will really know if the recent rains have put those fires to bed, or whether they're still coming back and they'll need another big storm or two to really knock things down for good. But quite often, you need to sometimes to get, you can get rain and then get like 10 feet of winter snow on top of a lot of these fires. And some of that stuff still burns under the duff and under the ground into the following spring. So we may have to wait for a really knockout punch. But this Wednesday will be a good test about 6-7 days from now. Go to the next slide, which I believe is the last, almost the last slide. That's precip next 7 days. Most of that's in the first 3 days. Looks almost identical, so we don't expect any more rain. Now the last slide, which will be the next slide, will be the 8 to 14 day outlook, and we continue. This is taking us from September 26th to October 2nd, much above normal temperature probabilities and a strong probability of below normal precipitation. So we'll stay dry. Now, if we do start seeing fire activity picking up in the next couple of days with the drying, that means as we go into late September, early October, they're going to have to leave some resources on some of these fires in western Wyoming as well as nearby Idaho to make sure nothing goes crazy out there. But we won't know until we actually see how the fire behaves with some of these weather tests with the humidity and wind the next couple of days. And that's all I got. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Basil. And with that, we'll wrap up, and I'll kick it back over to Wendy Kelly.
All right, great. Well, thanks a lot to everyone. And I see we have about 11 minutes left in our time. So I threw in a couple of bonus slides just in case that I'll go ahead and present, and then we'll come back to this slide. So Tony, if you don't mind forwarding to the next slide. We've had a lot of talk about wildland fires and wildfire here in Wyoming. And I wanted to share a resource to everyone in case you haven't seen it already. So the University of Wyoming Extension, among others, have pulled together a wildfire resource webpage. And you can see the bit.ly link towards the bottom left of your screen on that slide, where you can find this. A couple of highlights. It has a nice overview of resources broke out by different topics. So kind of organized. You can see the first bar that's yellow is producers affected by wildfire. So for agricultural producers, they can go here, or if you serve them and are looking for resources. Towards the right on that bar, and I circled it in red, there's a plus sign. If you click on that, which this isn't a live clickable function, but if you were to go to the website and click on it, it'll drop down. And there's a number of resources listed there, including, for example, information that agricultural producers should be documenting if they were impacted by wildfire. There's other resources as well, so I encourage you to go check that out. The next bar down is producers affected by wildfire, and I put it in a kind of a triangle, or not a triangle, a rectangle, financial resources. And here in a moment, I'll have Tony advance the slide, not quite yet, and show a couple of a highlight of financial resources that are out there. And then you'll see down below, I put just in a table format, there's additional subjects, including before wildfire, but what I put in asterisks is after wildfire. So resources to check out there. And then there's also wildfire in the area with resources in wildfire ecology. So you'll have access to the bit.ly link after today's webinar if you didn't catch it in time. And go ahead and advance to the next slide, Tony. So as I noted before, the second kind of category options is producers affected by wildfire and financial resources. And two that I like to draw people's attention to is the first one is the Disaster Assistance Discovery Tool, which is a USDA tool. And you can see on the kind of lower left, Disaster Assistance Discovery Tool and the bit.ly link to that website. This is a really great tool to walk producers through. You answer a series of questions, including, you can see the first one there, did you suffer a loss or damage as a result of a natural disaster? And it'll walk them through to help identify potential programs they might qualify for and how to prepare to meet with their local USDA representatives to go in and have meetings with them to explore those opportunities. The second one is on the right is the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. It does have a wildfire relief fund and application for assistance. Below, you can see the Wyoming Stock Growers direct web link, and from their homepage, you can click on and access the instructions for the application of this program. So I just wanted to highlight those before we transition into Q&A. And Tony, you can go back to the contacts for our presenters. I want to acknowledge each of our presenters again today for taking the time to prepare their presentations and the slides and then coming on today to present, as well as all of our attendees for joining us. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll go into Q&A, as I do see we have a number of comments and questions. So one moment.